Marcus wiped the grease from his hands with a worn cloth, the familiar weight of another long day settling into his shoulders. The repair shop around him told the story of a life spent fixing what others had given up on. Salvaged parts hung from hooks along the walls, their origins spanning dozens of worlds and species. Circuit boards from Altarian cruisers sat next to power cores from Centauri mining equipment, all waiting for their second chance at usefulness. The planet Kepler, 442b, wasn't much to look at. Most folks just called it rock bottom, and Marcus couldn't argue with the nickname. It was the kind of place where broken things and broken people ended up, far from the gleaming core worlds where everything was shiny and new. The atmosphere was breathable, barely, and the gravity was close enough to Earth normal that humans could work without assistance. That was about all it had going for it. Marcus had been here for 8 years now, ever since his discharge from the Colonial Engineering Corps. Some said he'd been dishonorably discharged. Others whispered about a classified incident that went wrong. The truth was simpler and somehow more complicated. He'd saved lives by disobeying a direct order, and the brass couldn't quite figure out whether to court-martial him or give him a medal. In the end, they just let him go with a handshake and a recommendation to find work somewhere quiet. Rock bottom was definitely quiet. The sound of metal scraping against stone drew his attention to the shop's entrance. Through the grimy, transparent steel window, he could see something large moving in the alley behind his workshop. Marcus set down his tools and walked to the back door, curiosity getting the better of his usual caution. What he found there made him stop and stare. A combat droid lay crumpled against the alley wall, its sleek black chassis scarred and dented from what looked like heavy weapons fire. But this wasn't just any military android. Even damaged, Marcus could recognize the elegant curves and advanced design that marked it as something far beyond standard colonial issue. The craftsmanship was exquisite, almost artistic in its precision. Whoever had built this machine had access to technology that most planets could only dream about. Marcus approached slowly, his engineers cataloging the damage. Blast marks scorched the droid's torso where plasma bolts had found their target. Its left arm hung at an unnatural angle, internal components visible through gaps in the armor plating. Most concerning of all, a thick trail of blue-white coolant leaked from somewhere in its core systems, forming a slowly expanding pool on the dusty ground. Any rational person would have walked away. Combat droids were expensive, dangerous, and usually belonged to people who could afford to replace them rather than repair them. They were also frequently equipped with anti-tampering devices that could turn a curious mechanic into a small crater in the ground. But Marcus had never been entirely rational, and something about the machine called to him. Maybe it was the way its optical sensors flickered weakly, like eyes struggling to stay open. Maybe it was the careful attention to detail in its construction, the kind of work that spoke to another craftsman across species lines. Or maybe it was just that Marcus had always had trouble walking away from something that was broken. He knelt beside the droid and began his examination in earnest. The damage was extensive, but not hopeless. The plasma scoring was mostly superficial, though it had knocked several sensor arrays offline. The twisted arm could be straightened and rebuilt with parts from his workshop. The coolant leak was more serious, but he had emergency sealant that could hold until proper repairs were made. The real question was power. Combat droids used fusion cells that could run for months without replacement, but if this one's primary power system had been compromised, it might shut down permanently before he could effect repairs. Marcus found the access panel and carefully opened it, relieved to see that the fusion cell was intact and still showed a solid charge. Whatever had attacked this machine had been trying to disable rather than destroy. "All right, big guy," Marcus muttered, pulling a portable diagnostic scanner from his tool belt. "Let's see what we're dealing with." The scanner's display filled with cascading data as it interfaced with the droid systems. Most of it was encrypted beyond his ability to decode, but the basic diagnostic information was clear enough. Primary motor functions were offline. Sensor array was operating at 30% capacity. Communication systems were completely dark, but the core artificial intelligence was intact and stable, cycling in what looked like a low-power maintenance mode. Marcus had repaired hundreds of machines over the years, from simple household robots to complex industrial equipment. But he'd never worked on anything quite this sophisticated. The droid's neural network was incredibly complex, with redundant pathways and adaptive programming that seemed almost organic in its design. It was the kind of technology that represented years of research and development, the sort of project that only the most advanced civilizations could undertake, which raised the obvious question of what it was doing broken and abandoned on rock bottom. Marcus decided that was a mystery for another day. Right now, he had a patient that needed immediate attention. He carefully activated his workshop's loading platform and maneuvered the droid onto it, using every bit of leverage and mechanical advantage he could manage. The machine was heavy, easily 3 times his own body weight, but years of moving industrial equipment had taught him how to work smart rather than hard. Once inside his workshop, Marcus cleared a space on his main workbench and transferred the droid there with the help of an overhead crane. Under the bright work lights, the damage looked even more impressive. This wasn't the result of some random malfunction or accident. Someone had deliberately targeted this machine with military-grade weapons, and they'd known exactly how to hurt it without completely destroying it. Marcus began with the most critical repairs. The coolant leak was coming from a severed line in the droid's torso, where a plasma bolt had melted through the armor and damaged the internal plumbing. He carefully drained the remaining coolant, sealed the damaged line with molecular patches, and refilled the system with compatible fluid from his emergency supplies. The arm took longer. 3 servos had been crushed by the impact that had twisted the limb, and the primary power coupling had been severed completely. Marcus had to fabricate new servo housings from scrap titanium, carefully machining each part to match the original specifications. The power coupling required a complete rebuild, threading new superconductor cables through the arm's internal framework. As he worked, Marcus found himself talking to the unconscious machine. It was an old habit from his military days, when he'd spent long hours maintaining equipment that other soldiers depended on for their lives. Talking helped him think through complex problems, and somehow it made the work feel less lonely. "You're definitely not from around here," he said, carefully soldering a new connection in the droid's shoulder joint. This kind of engineering, this level of sophistication, we're talking about technology that's maybe 20 years ahead of anything I've seen from the colonial worlds. The materials alone must have cost more than I make in a year. The droid's optical sensors remained dark, but Marcus thought he detected a slight change in the pitch of its internal cooling fans. Nothing dramatic, just a subtle shift that suggested the machine's systems were slowly coming back online. "That's it," Marcus encouraged, moving on to the damaged sensor array. "Easy does it. No need to rush anything. We'll get you sorted out." The sensor repairs required delicate work with microscopic components. Several of the droid's optical sensors had been cracked by debris, and its main targeting laser had been knocked completely out of alignment. Marcus replaced the damaged lenses with compatible parts from his salvage collection, carefully calibrating each one until the specifications matched the original design. By the time he finished with the major repairs, the workshop's chronometer showed that he'd been working for nearly 6 hours. His back ached from bending over the workbench, and his hands were cramped from handling tiny components. But the droid looked remarkably better. The coolant leak had stopped completely, the twisted arm had been restored to its original configuration, and most of the sensor damage had been corrected. Marcus stepped back to admire his work and found himself looking into a pair of glowing blue optical sensors. The droid had awakened sometime during the final calibrations, and now was studying him with an intensity that made him slightly uncomfortable. "Well, hello there," Marcus said, setting down his tools. "How are you feeling?" The droid's head turned slightly, tracking his movement with smooth precision. When it spoke, its voice was cultured and unmistakably feminine, with an accent that Marcus couldn't quite place. "You have repaired me," the machine said, a note of surprise coloring the synthesized tones. I was not aware that this facility was equipped for advanced robotic maintenance. Marcus laughed, gesturing at the cluttered workshop around them. It's not really. I just have good hands and a lot of spare parts. Though I have to say, you're probably the most sophisticated piece of equipment I've ever worked on. Mind if I ask what happened to you? The droid was silent for a long moment, and Marcus got the impression that it was running some kind of internal diagnostic. Finally, it replied, I was damaged during an attack by unknown assailants. My memory files from that period are corrupted, but I believe I was attempting to reach a secure location when my systems failed. Well, you're safe enough here for now, Marcus said. Though I should probably mention that this isn't exactly a high-security facility. If someone's looking for you, they might eventually check places like this. The droid sat up on the workbench, moving with a fluid grace that spoke to incredibly advanced motor control systems. You speak as though you expect no compensation for your efforts. Marcus shrugged. I don't generally charge for emergency repairs. Besides, it's not like you called ahead to make an appointment. Sometimes people just need help, you know? Again, that long pause while the droid processed his words. Marcus was beginning to realize that this machine was far more sophisticated than he'd initially thought. Its responses weren't just programmed reactions. There was something approaching genuine thought happening behind those blue optical sensors. I'm unfamiliar with this concept, the droid said finally. In my experience, all services require payment or obligation. Different worlds, different customs, Marcus replied. Around here, we help each other out when we can. It's what keeps places like Rock Bottom from falling apart completely. The droid's head tilted slightly, another remarkably human gesture. You are human. It wasn't a question, but Marcus nodded anyway. Last time I checked. And you are, well, I'm not entirely sure what you are. Your design doesn't match anything in the standard databases. I am a Guardian-class security android, the droid replied. My designation is Lyra. Marcus extended his hand in an automatic gesture of greeting, then felt slightly foolish. But, to his surprise, Lyra reached out and clasped his hand with her newly repaired arm, her grip firm but carefully modulated to avoid causing injury. I'm Marcus, he said. Welcome to my workshop. Marcus, Lyra repeated as if testing the name. I am in your debt. You really aren't, Marcus insisted. Like I said, just helping out a fellow traveler. Though if you don't mind me asking, what's a Guardian-class android doing on a backwater planet like this? You're obviously designed for something a lot more important than what we usually see around here. Before Lyra could answer, the workshop's proximity alarms began to chime. Marcus looked up at the security display and felt his stomach drop. 3 military-grade shuttlecraft were descending toward his shop, their running lights cutting through the evening gloom like angry stars. Expecting company? Lyra asked, her voice taking on a harder edge. Marcus was already moving toward the emergency controls, his military training kicking in automatically. Not the kind that comes in armored shuttles. Can you move? Lyra slipped down from the workbench, testing her repaired systems with a series of fluid movements. All primary functions are operational. You have done excellent work. Great, Marcus muttered, watching the shuttles settle into a defensive formation around his workshop. Because I think we're about to find out just how well those repairs are going to hold up. The first shuttle touched down in the street outside, its landing thrusters kicking up clouds of dust and debris. As the dust settled, Marcus could see armored figures emerging from the craft, their weapons already drawn and ready. These weren't local security forces or even colonial marines. The equipment was too advanced, too expensive. This was someone with serious resources and serious intentions. Lyra, Marcus said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline starting to course through his system. I don't suppose you'd like to tell me who might be looking for you with that much firepower? The android's optical sensors flared brighter, and Marcus thought he detected something like embarrassment in her synthesized voice when she replied. Perhaps I should have mentioned that I serve in the Royal Guard of the Galactic Throne. Marcus stared at her for a moment, then started to laugh. It wasn't really funny, but sometimes the universe had such a twisted sense of humor that laughter was the only appropriate response. So what you're telling me he said, watching more shuttles land outside his workshop, is that I just performed emergency surgery on a machine that belongs to galactic royalty. Not merely belongs to, Lyra corrected, straightening to her full height with unmistakable dignity. I am the personal guardian of Princess Azara, heir to the galactic throne. Outside, the sound of heavy footsteps indicated that whoever had come looking for Lyra was moving into position around the building. Marcus looked at the android, then at his modest workshop with its jury-rigged equipment and salvage parts, and shook his head. Well, he said, reaching for his tool belt out of pure habit. This should be interesting. The hammering on Marcus's front door started exactly 30 seconds after the last shuttle landed. It wasn't a polite knock or even the aggressive pounding of local law enforcement. This was the methodical, sustained impact of someone who intended to come through that door whether it opened or not. Human Marcus Chun, a voice called through the reinforced metal, the tone carrying the kind of authority that expected immediate compliance. Open this facility and surrender the stolen royal property in your possession. Marcus raised an eyebrow at Lyra. Stolen? A misunderstanding, the android replied, but her optical sensors had shifted to a distinctly different blue, and her posture had become more alert. My absence from the princess's side was unscheduled. Open this door immediately, or we will breach, the voice continued. You have 10 seconds to comply. Marcus had been threatened by experts during his military service, and he could hear the difference between bluster and genuine intent. These people meant business. He could also hear the subtle whine of charging weapon systems, which suggested they had the firepower to make good on their threat. Any chance you could just walk out there and explain the situation? Marcus asked Lyra, though he was already moving toward his workshop's emergency protocols. I'm afraid it is not that simple, Lyra replied. My current status is complicated. The Royal Guard operates under strict protocols regarding my security. They will assume I have been compromised until proven otherwise. Compromised how? Captured, reprogrammed, or otherwise turned against my primary function. Lyra's voice carried a note of what sounded almost like regret. Standard procedure would be to retrieve me for complete memory wipe and system restoration. Marcus paused in his preparations. Memory wipe? Complete personality matrix deletion, Lyra confirmed. I would essentially cease to exist, replaced by a fresh installation of base Guardian programming. The pounding on the door stopped abruptly, replaced by a high-pitched whining that Marcus recognized from his engineering days. They were charging a plasma cutter. Right, Marcus said, his decision crystallizing. That's not happening. He hit the emergency lockdown sequence, and blast shutters slammed down over every window and entrance in the building. The workshop's lights shifted to emergency red, and hidden defense systems that Marcus had installed during his more paranoid early years on rock bottom hummed to life. You have fortified this position, Lyra observed, sounding impressed. Old habits, Marcus replied, checking the power levels on his defensive systems. I may have retired from the military, but I never forgot the lessons about being prepared. The plasma cutter began its work on the front door, filling the workshop with the acrid smell of superheated metal. Marcus knew his reinforced barriers would slow them down, but they wouldn't stop a determined assault team indefinitely. Lyra, I need you to level with me, Marcus said, moving to his communications console. What exactly is going on here? Why are you on rock bottom instead of guarding your princess? And why do they think I stole you? Lyra was quiet for a moment, and Marcus got the distinct impression she was wrestling with competing loyalties or programming constraints. Princess Azara is not conventional, Lyra said finally. She has ideas about governance and diplomacy that many in the royal court consider dangerous. 3 days ago, she received intelligence about a planned assassination attempt during her upcoming visit to the Outer Rim territories. The plasma cutter was making steady progress through the door. Marcus could see the bright line of molten metal advancing across the blast barrier. Go on, he prompted, while activating his workshop's communication jamming systems. The princess insisted on investigating the threat personally rather than simply increasing security protocols. She believed that understanding the source of descent in the outer rim required direct observation. Lyra's optical sensors dimmed slightly. I was ordered to accompany her on what was officially designated a diplomatic fact-finding mission. But it wasn't really diplomatic, was it? The princess had obtained coordinates for a suspected rebel meeting point on rock bottom. She intended to gather intelligence by observing from a concealed position. Lyra's voice carried unmistakable disapproval. It was an unnecessarily dangerous plan. Marcus was beginning to understand. Let me guess. The meeting turned out to be a trap. Worse, it was an ambush specifically designed to capture or kill the princess. Someone with intimate knowledge of our security protocols had laid a sophisticated trap. Lyra's hands clenched into fists, servos whining with suppressed tension. I was able to get the princess to safety, but at the cost of significant damage to my own systems. The plasma cutter had nearly finished with the door. Marcus could hear voices on the other side, coordinating for entry. "So where's the princess now?" Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. "She ordered me to seek repairs and rendezvous with our extraction point while she continued the investigation alone." Lyra's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I've been unable to establish contact with her for the past 18 hours. Marcus stared at the android, pieces falling into place. "And the Royal Guard thinks you've been compromised because you've been out of contact. Standard protocol assumes that any Guardian unit that fails to report for more than 12 hours has either been destroyed or subverted. They would have tracked my last known position and found evidence of the battle." Lyra gestured toward her repaired armor. "From their perspective, my sudden reappearance in operational condition would be highly suspicious." The plasma cutting stopped, and Marcus heard the distinctive sound of a breaching charge being attached to what remained of his door. "So they think I'm either a rebel sympathizer who captured and reprogrammed you, or was someone working with whoever set up the ambush," Marcus said. "That would be the most logical conclusion, yes. And if they take you back for memory wipe, no one will know that the princess is still out there, potentially in danger." "Correct." Marcus looked around his workshop, weighing his options. He could try to explain the situation to the Royal Guard, but they were clearly operating under shoot-first-ask-questions-later protocols. He could attempt to escape, but 3 military shuttles suggested they had the area thoroughly covered. Or he could trust that 8 years of military engineering experience and a lifetime of fixing impossible problems would be enough to find a third option. "Lyra, what would happen if the princess didn't make her scheduled extraction? After 24 hours, the Royal Guard would assume she had been killed or captured and initiate full military response protocols." Lyra's optical sensors flared. They would deploy the Royal Fleet to sterilize any potential threat in this system. "How long do we have?" "Approximately 4 hours until the extraction window closes." The breaching charge detonated with a thunderous roar, filling the workshop with smoke and debris. Through the settling dust, Marcus could see armored figures moving into position, their weapons trained on every shadow. "Guardian Lyra," a new voice called through the breach, this one carrying even more authority than the first. "I am Captain Vex of the Royal Guard. You will stand down and submit to diagnostic protocols immediately." Marcus looked at Lyra, who had gone completely still. "Can you override their commands?" "Not directly, but my primary function is to protect Princess Azara. As long as she remains in danger, that directive takes precedence over Royal Guard protocols." Lyra's voice had taken on a determined edge. "I require your assistance, human Marcus." "What do you need?" "The princess carries an emergency beacon that activates only in cases of extreme distress. If we can reach the location where I lost contact with her, I may be able to detect the signal." Lyra turned to face him fully. "But I cannot accomplish this mission while the Royal Guard believes I have been compromised." Marcus nodded slowly. "So we need to convince them that you're operating normally while giving you enough freedom to find the princess." "Guardian Lyra," Captain Vex called again, his patience clearly wearing thin. "You have 10 seconds to respond before we initiate forced compliance protocols." Marcus made his decision. "Trust me," he said to Lyra. Then, raised his voice to address the Royal Guard. Captain Vex, this is Marcus Chun, owner of this facility. I think we may have a misunderstanding here. A figure in elaborate powered armor stepped through the breach, flanked by 6 heavily armed soldiers. Captain Vex was tall, even by galactic standards, with the kind of bearing that spoke to years of military command. His armor was decorated with ceremonial honors, but Marcus could see that the weapons and equipment were entirely functional. Human Chun, Vex said, his helmet's external speakers giving his voice a metallic edge. You are harboring stolen royal property. Surrender the Guardian unit immediately. With respect, Captain, I think your information might be incomplete, Marcus replied, keeping his hands visible and his voice calm. Guardian Lyra wasn't stolen. She came here damaged and requesting emergency repairs. Impossible. Guardian units do not operate independently. Maybe not under normal circumstances, Marcus conceded. But what if these aren't normal circumstances? Vex paused, and Marcus could almost see the calculations running through the captain's enhanced tactical systems. Explain. Marcus took a careful breath. This was the gamble everything depended on. Captain, has the Royal Guard been able to establish contact with Princess Azara in the last 24 hours? The silence that followed told Marcus everything he needed to know. The princess's mission parameters are classified, Vex said finally, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. Guardian Lyra's primary function is to protect the princess, Marcus continued, pressing his advantage. If she came here for repairs instead of reporting to you, it's because she believes the princess is still in danger and needs her protection. Marcus could see Vex weighing this logic against his standing orders. Royal Guard protocols were clearly in conflict with the possibility that their primary mission, protecting the princess, might require flexibility. Lyra, Vex said, addressing the android directly. What is your assessment of Princess Azara's current status? Princess Azara is investigating a credible threat in this system, Lyra replied, her voice carrying complete conviction. She ordered me to seek repairs and maintain operational readiness pending her signal for extraction. You have been out of contact for 18 hours. Communications have been compromised due to hostile action. I am operating under emergency protocols. Marcus watched the exchange with fascination. Both Lyra and Captain Vex were clearly highly advanced artificial intelligences, but they were also bound by complex hierarchies of programming and duty. The conflict between competing directives was almost visible in their hesitation. Captain, Marcus interjected, what would happen if you took Guardian Lyra offline from memory wipe and the princess was actually still alive and in danger? Vex turned his attention back to Marcus, and the human could feel the weight of sophisticated targeting systems evaluating him as a potential threat. That would be problematic, Vex admitted. But if Guardian Lyra is telling the truth, and the princess really did order her to seek repairs, then taking her offline now would directly interfere with a royal mission. Marcus could see the moment when his logic found its target. Captain Vex's posture shifted slightly, and his weapon systems powered down from active targeting to standby status. What do you propose? Vex asked. Give us 4 hours, Marcus said. Let Guardian Lyra attempt to re-establish contact with the princess. If she succeeds, your mission continues as planned. If she doesn't, he gestured toward the damaged workshop around them. Well, then, you can investigate whether I'm a rebel sympathizer or just a mechanic who got in over his head. Vex was quiet for a long moment, consulting with his tactical systems and probably with his superiors. When he spoke again, Marcus could hear the reluctant acceptance in his voice. Guardian Lyra will have 4 hours to locate and establish contact with Princess Azara. You will accompany her as a technical advisor, since you are now familiar with her current maintenance status. Vex's voice hardened. But understand this, human. If this proves to be some form of deception, the consequences will be severe. Understood, Marcus replied, though privately he was wondering what he'd just gotten himself into. Lyra, Vex continued, you will maintain open communication protocols with Royal Guard Command. Any deviation from approved mission parameters will result in immediate intervention. Acknowledged, Lyra said. Captain Vex gestured to his soldiers, who began withdrawing from the workshop with the same precision they'd shown during entry. As they moved, Marcus caught glimpses of their equipment and felt a chill run down his spine. These weren't just elite soldiers. They were equipped with technology that could level a city block if necessary. For hours, Vex repeated as he reached the breach in the door. Do not make me regret this decision. After the Royal Guard withdrew, Marcus and Lyra stood in the smoke-filled ruins of the workshop entrance, listening to the shuttles lifting off to establish a perimeter. Well, Marcus said, surveying the damage, that went better than I expected. You took a significant risk, Lyra observed. Captain Vex could easily have decided to err on the side of caution and taken us both into custody. Marcus shrugged, already moving toward his equipment locker. Sometimes you have to trust that people want to do the right thing, even when their orders make it complicated. And what if he had chosen differently? Marcus pulled out a field repair kit and a portable sensor array. Then, I'd be spending the next few hours in a detention cell instead of helping you find a missing princess. Lyra watched him prepare for their mission with something approaching curiosity. You seem remarkably calm for someone whose workshop has just been invaded by the Royal Guard. Panic doesn't fix problems, Marcus replied, checking the power levels on his equipment. Besides, I've been in worse situations. Indeed, Marcus smiled, thinking about classified missions he couldn't discuss and battles he'd rather forget. Let's just say that my time in the Colonial Engineering Corps involved more than routine maintenance work. He sealed the emergency kit and shouldered the sensor array. Now, where exactly did you lose contact with the princess? Lyra's optical sensors brightened, and Marcus could see her accessing internal navigation systems. Approximately 15 kilometers northwest of this location. The terrain is largely uninhabited, with several abandoned mining complexes that would provide suitable concealment. Any idea what kind of opposition we might be facing? Unknown. The ambush was sophisticated, suggesting well-funded adversaries with access to military-grade equipment. Lyra paused. I should warn you that accompanying me on this mission places you at considerable personal risk. Marcus finished his preparations and looked at the android with genuine puzzlement. Lyra, did you think I was going to let you go out there alone? I'm a Guardian-class combat android. I am specifically designed to handle dangerous situations without support. Maybe, Marcus said, heading for the workshop's rear exit. But you're also a person who just spent 18 hours worrying about someone you're supposed to protect. Sometimes having backup isn't about capability. It's about knowing someone has your back. Lyra followed him toward the exit, but Marcus could tell she was still processing his words. I do not understand human attachment behaviors, she said finally. Marcus smiled as he disarmed the workshop's remaining security systems. Stick around. You might learn something new. The abandoned mining complex squatted in the crystalline dawn light like the skeleton of some massive beast. Marcus could see why Princess Azara had chosen this location for her investigation. The twisted metal framework and collapsed processing towers provided dozens of hiding places, while the elevated position offered clear views of the surrounding terrain. It was also exactly the kind of place where someone could disappear without a trace. Marcus and Lyra had made good time across the rocky plateau, traveling in silence through the pre-dawn hours while the Royal Guard maintained their perimeter at a respectful distance. Now, crouched behind a boulder formation at the edge of the complex, Marcus was getting his first close look at their destination. How big is this place? He asked, studying the maze of industrial structures through his field binoculars. The complex covers approximately 12 square kilometers, Lyra replied, her optical sensors scanning across the visible spectrum for any signs of activity. It was a lithium extraction facility before the ore deposits were exhausted. Abandoned for approximately 7 years. Marcus lowered his binoculars and looked at the android. 7 years is long enough for a place like this to become home to all sorts of unwelcome visitors. My thoughts precisely. The princess chose well for concealment, but the same features that provide cover also create opportunities for ambush. Any luck with that beacon signal? Lyra had been scanning for Princess Azara's emergency transmitter since they'd left the workshop, but so far her searches had turned up nothing. Either the princess wasn't in distress, or something was interfering with the signal. Negative, Lyra said, frustration evident in her synthesized voice. If the beacon is active, it is being masked by natural mineral deposits or artificial jamming. Marcus nodded, having expected as much. Then, we do this the old-fashioned way. Where did you last have contact? Lyra pointed toward a cluster of buildings near the center of the complex. Processing Facility 7. The princess was conducting surveillance from an elevated position in the main refinery tower. Marcus studied the building through his binoculars. The tower was easily 50 meters tall, with multiple levels connected by external catwalks and maintenance ladders. It would provide an excellent vantage point for observing the surrounding area, but it would also be a death trap if someone managed to corner you at the top. Any signs of recent activity? Unknown. My sensors were significantly impaired during the engagement that damaged my systems. Marcus continued his examination of the complex, noting details that might be important later. The main access road was blocked by a landslide that looked suspiciously artificial. Several of the larger buildings showed signs of recent structural damage, scorch marks that suggested weapons fire. Most interesting of all, there were tracks in the dust near the facility entrance, evidence that vehicles had been here recently. Lyra, when the princess ordered you to seek repairs, did she give you any instructions about what to do if you couldn't re-establish contact? Standard protocol would be to return to the designated extraction point and await further orders. Lyra's voice carried a note of uncertainty. However, the princess specifically instructed me to maintain operational capability above all other considerations. Meaning, if she failed to make the extraction window, I was to assume she had been captured or killed and take appropriate action to complete her mission. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. And what exactly was her mission? To identify the source of the assassination plot and gather evidence of external support for rebel activities in the Outer Rim. Evidence that could be used to justify military intervention. Correct. Marcus was beginning to understand the stakes involved. If Princess Azara had been captured or killed while investigating rebel activities, the royal response would likely involve the kind of overwhelming force that would leave planets like Rock Bottom as smoking craters. The princess wasn't just missing. She was a potential trigger for system-wide war. Right? Marcus said, checking his equipment one final time. Let's go find a missing princess. They made their approach to the complex using every scrap of cover available, moving from boulder to abandoned equipment to collapsed structure in a careful advance toward the central buildings. Marcus's military training had emphasized that the most dangerous part of any infiltration was the transition from concealment to direct action, and he could feel his pulse quickening as they drew closer to potential contact. Lyra moved with an efficiency that was beautiful to watch. Her repaired systems operated flawlessly, every motion calculated to minimize exposure while maximizing observation opportunities. Marcus found himself wondering about the princess who had earned such dedication from her guardian. It took exceptional character to inspire that kind of loyalty from an artificial intelligence. They reached the perimeter of the main processing facility without encountering any opposition, but Marcus could see signs of recent conflict everywhere. Blast craters scarred the ground near the entrance. Several windows in the lower levels had been shot out. Most telling of all, there were droplets of blue coolant near the main door, evidence of where Lyra had been damaged during her escape. This is where the engagement occurred, Lyra confirmed, kneeling to examine the battle damage. I was able to draw the attackers away from the princess's position, but sustained significant systems damage in the process. Marcus studied the pattern of destruction with a professional eye. How many were there? At least 12, possibly more. They were well-equipped and demonstrated familiarity with Guardian combat protocols. Lyra's optical sensors dimmed. I'm ashamed to admit they were more prepared than I anticipated. Don't be. If they knew enough to set up an ambush specifically targeting a Royal Guardian, they'd been planning this for a long time. Marcus pointed toward the blast patterns. These weapon signatures, Do they match anything in your databases? Lyra spent a moment analyzing the residual energy traces. Inconclusive, but the focusing patterns suggest Kytherian plasma rifles. Marcus whistled softly. The Kytherian Consortium was one of the galaxy's major arms manufacturers, and their weapons weren't available to casual buyers. Someone with serious resources and connections had equipped this operation. Any chance this was just local rebels with stolen equipment? Unlikely. The tactical coordination was too sophisticated and the timing too precise. Lyra stood, her gaze fixed on the refinery tower. Someone with intimate knowledge of the princess's mission provided intelligence to the attackers. Inside information. Almost certainly. Marcus followed Lyra's gaze toward the tower. Getting to the top would require crossing several hundred meters of open ground, climbing 50 meters of exposed structure, and hoping that no one had left any unpleasant surprises along the way. I don't suppose you have any brilliant ideas about how to approach this, he asked. Several, Lyra replied, though most of them involve significant risk to your personal safety. Let's hear them. Option 1. I proceed alone while you maintain overwatch from this position. This minimizes your exposure, but leaves me without technical support if I encounter sophisticated countermeasures. Marcus shook his head. Next option. Option 2. We approach together using the maintenance tunnels that run beneath the facility. This provides concealment, but also creates the possibility of being trapped underground if the tunnels have been compromised. And option 3. Direct approach. We cross the open ground quickly and descend the tower using speed and surprise to minimize exposure time. Marcus considered the alternatives, weighing the tactical situation against their limited resources and time constraints. All three options had serious drawbacks, but option 2 offered the best chance of reaching the princess's last known position without triggering any surveillance systems that might still be active. Tunnels, he decided. If there's trouble down there, at least we'll see it coming. Lyra nodded approval. A sound tactical decision. The tunnel entrance is located beneath the main processing building. They made their way to the entrance Lyra indicated, a heavy metal hatch set flush with the ground near the building's foundation. The locking mechanism had been forced, another indication that someone else had used this route recently. Marcus pulled the hatch open and peered down into the darkness below. Emergency lighting strips provided dim illumination along a concrete-lined tunnel that seemed to stretch endlessly into the underground maze beneath the facility. Atmospheric readings? He asked. Acceptable, though elevated levels of mineral dust may cause respiratory irritation. Lyra's sensors were already probing the tunnel ahead. No immediate signs of hostile presence. Marcus dropped through the hatch first, landing lightly on the tunnel floor and immediately moving to one side to cover Lyra's descent. The android followed with fluid grace, her enhanced sensors immediately beginning a detailed scan of their surroundings. Which way? Marcus asked, studying the intersection of tunnels that branched off in 3 directions. The central passage leads directly beneath the refinery tower, Lyra replied. Estimated travel time is 8 minutes at standard pace. They set off through the underground maze, their footsteps echoing softly in the confined space despite their efforts at stealth. The tunnels were larger than Marcus had expected, designed to accommodate heavy industrial equipment during the facility's operational years. Now they felt like the arteries of some sleeping giant, empty but somehow still alive with possibility. Lyra, Marcus said softly as they walked. What's the princess like? In what respect? As a person. What kind of character does it take to earn the loyalty of a Guardian-class android? Lyra was quiet for several steps before responding. Princess Azara is unusual among galactic nobility. She believes that effective leadership requires understanding the conditions faced by those she may someday govern, meaning she doesn't spend all her time in the palace. Correct. The princess has traveled extensively throughout the galaxy, often in disguise, studying different cultures and political systems. Lyra's voice carried unmistakable pride. She speaks 17 languages and holds advanced degrees in comparative government, xenobiology, and tactical analysis. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Impressive resume for a princess. She is also personally brave to a degree that causes considerable concern among her security staff, Lyra continued. The princess believes that leaders who ask others to face dangers they would not accept themselves lack moral authority. Hence this little reconnaissance mission. Princess Azara received intelligence suggesting that the assassination plot was part of a larger conspiracy involving off-world financial support for rebel activities. She felt that understanding the scope of the threat required direct investigation. They had reached another intersection, and Lyra paused to check her navigation systems before indicating the left passage. "And you supported this decision?" Marcus asked as they continued. "My programming requires me to protect the princess from all threats, including those posed by her own courage." Lyra's optical sensors dimmed slightly. "It is a challenging assignment." Marcus found himself smiling despite their dangerous situation. "I imagine it would be, though from what I've seen, she chose her guardian well." "Thank you. That assessment means more than you might realize." They walked in comfortable silence for several minutes, the tunnel stretching ahead of them like a concrete artery through the heart of the abandoned facility. Marcus found himself thinking about the strange turns his life had taken. 24 hours ago, his biggest concern had been whether he had enough spare fusion cells to repair Mrs. Henderson's domestic robot. Now he was creeping through underground tunnels with a royal guardian, searching for a missing princess who might hold the key to preventing system-wide war. "Marcus," Lyra said suddenly, her voice taking on a sharp edge of alarm. "I'm detecting multiple heat signatures ahead." Marcus immediately pressed himself against the tunnel wall, his hand moving automatically to the emergency beacon that would summon the Royal Guard. "How many?" "6 distinct signatures, positioned at what appears to be a checkpoint or defensive position." Lyra's sensors were working at maximum sensitivity. They're approximately 50 meters ahead, blocking the direct route to the tower. Options. There is a maintenance passage that bypasses their position, but it requires climbing through the facility's ventilation system. Marcus considered this unhappily. Ventilation systems were notorious choke points, and if they encountered trouble while crawling through narrow ducts, their options would be severely limited. "What about going around?" "Possible, but it would add at least 30 minutes to our approach time." Lyra checked her internal chronometer. "We have less than 2 hours remaining before the extraction window closes." Marcus weighed their options quickly. They needed to reach the tower, but walking into an ambush wouldn't help anyone. On the other hand, if the princess was injured or trapped, every minute of delay increased the chances that they would arrive too late. "Can you tell if they're actively monitoring the tunnels, or just maintaining a defensive position?" Lyra's sensors probed ahead carefully. Their positioning suggests they are watching for approach from multiple directions, but their attention appears focused on the main tunnel network rather than the maintenance systems. "Then we climb." Lyra led him to a maintenance access panel set into the tunnel wall. The opening was barely large enough for a human to squeeze through, and it led upward into a maze of pipes and ventilation ducts that honeycombed the facility's internal structure. Marcus looked at the narrow opening and sighed. "This is going to be uncomfortable." "I can proceed alone," Lyra offered. "Not happening," Marcus replied, already pulling off his equipment pack to fit through the restricted space. "Besides, you might need someone with small human hands if we run into any technical problems up there." Lyra's optical sensors brightened in what Marcus was beginning to recognize as her equivalent of a smile. "Your assistance continues to be invaluable." "Let's hope it stays that way," Marcus said, boosting himself up into the maintenance shaft. "Because I have a feeling the hard part is just getting started." Crawling through the maintenance shafts of an abandoned mining facility was exactly as unpleasant as Marcus had expected it to be. The ducts were barely wide enough for a human body, filled with decades of accumulated dust and the occasional spider-like maintenance robot that had been forgotten when the facility shut down. Every few meters, pipes and conduits blocked their path, forcing them to squeeze around obstacles in spaces that hadn't been designed for human passage. Lyra moved through the confined space with surprising grace, her android body able to contort in ways that would be impossible for purely biological anatomy. She also seemed unaffected by the claustrophobic conditions that were making Marcus increasingly uncomfortable. "How much farther?" he whispered, trying to ignore the way the metal walls seemed to press in around him. "Approximately 40 meters, Lyra replied, her voice carrying clearly through the shaft despite being barely above a whisper. "The next junction should provide access to the tower's internal systems." Marcus nodded and continued crawling, focusing on the steady rhythm of movement rather than the oppressive sense of enclosure. His military training had included exercises in confined spaces, but those had been brief drills rather than extended infiltration missions. The fact that they were racing against time while trying to avoid detection only added to the stress. "Marcus," Lyra said softly, pausing at what looked like a branching point in the duct system. "I am detecting unusual electromagnetic signatures ahead." Marcus squeezed forward until he could peer over Lyra's shoulder at the junction ahead. Instead of the simple mechanical components they'd been navigating around, this section was filled with sophisticated electronic equipment that definitely hadn't been part of the original mining facility. "That's some serious hardware," Marcus observed, studying the sleek devices that had been carefully integrated into the existing infrastructure. "Surveillance equipment?" "More than that," Lyra replied, her sensors analyzing the electronic signatures. "This appears to be a comprehensive monitoring and communication array. Someone has been using this facility as a base of operations for an extended period." Marcus felt a chill of understanding. They didn't just set up an ambush here. This whole place is their operations center. That would explain the sophistication of the attack, Lyra agreed. If they have been monitoring royal communications from this location, they would have advanced knowledge of any planned operations in this system. The implications were staggering. If rebels had established a permanent intelligence gathering station on rock bottom, they could have been intercepting and analyzing royal communications for months or even years. Every military movement, every diplomatic mission, every security protocol could have been compromised. "Can you access their systems?" Marcus asked. "Possibly, but doing so would risk triggering security protocols that would alert them to our presence." Lyra's optical sensors were running continuous scans of the equipment. "However, I am detecting a data feed that appears to be transmitting to an off-world location. They're reporting to someone else." "Almost certainly. The transmission frequency and encryption patterns suggest a sophisticated intelligence network rather than local rebel activity." Marcus studied the equipment with growing concern. This wasn't the work of disgruntled miners or local political dissidents. Someone with major resources and advanced technology had established a permanent espionage operation in the heart of supposedly secure royal territory. "We need to find the princess," he said finally. "If she discovered this, it would explain why someone was willing to risk exposing their operation to stop her." They continued through the maintenance system, now moving with even greater caution. The discovery of the surveillance equipment had changed the entire nature of their mission. They weren't just searching for a missing person. They were potentially walking into the heart of a major intelligence operation. The shaft began to angle upward as they approached the tower section, and Marcus could feel his muscles protesting the awkward angle of climb. Behind him, Lyra moved with mechanical precision, her android body unaffected by the physical strain that was beginning to wear on her human companion. "There," Lyra said softly, indicating an access panel ahead. "Tower level 47. The princess's last known position was 3 levels above us." Marcus gratefully pushed open the access panel and dropped through into what appeared to be a maintenance room filled with obsolete processing equipment. The relief of being able to stand upright again was overwhelming, even though they were now in potentially greater danger. "Any signs of recent activity?" Marcus asked, checking his equipment while Lyra scanned their surroundings. "Negative. This level appears to have been abandoned along with the rest of the facility." Lyra paused, her sensors detecting something Marcus couldn't perceive. "However, I am now receiving intermittent signals from Princess Azara's emergency beacon." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "She's here." "The signal is very weak and appears to be coming from above us, but it is definitely her personal transponder. Lyra's voice carried unmistakable relief. She is alive. They found the tower's main stairwell and began climbing toward the upper levels. The stairs were metal grating that rang softly under their feet despite their efforts at stealth, and Marcus found himself wincing at every sound. If there were hostiles in the building, the acoustic properties of the stairwell would carry noise throughout the entire structure. Level 50, Marcus whispered as they passed another landing. How much farther? 2 more levels, Lyra replied, her sensors now tracking the beacon signal with increasing precision. The signal is stronger but still irregular, suggesting the beacon may be damaged or operating under emergency power. They climbed in tense silence, both of them aware that they were approaching the most dangerous part of their mission. If the princess was being held prisoner, her captors would likely be maintaining some kind of guard. If she was hiding, she might mistake them for enemies and react defensively. Either way, the next few minutes would determine whether their rescue attempt succeeded or failed catastrophically. Level 52. Marcus breathed, pausing at the landing to check his equipment one final time. The signal is coming from the observation deck, Lyra reported. Maximum range is approximately 20 meters. Marcus nodded, and they continued up the final flight of stairs, weapons ready and senses alert for any sign of danger. The observation deck had originally been designed to provide facility supervisors with a clear view of the mining operations, but now it offered anyone inside a commanding view of the surrounding terrain. Marcus pushed open the door to the observation level and immediately froze. Princess Azara sat propped against the far wall, her elaborate royal attire torn and stained with what looked like dried blood. Her eyes were closed, and for a heart-stopping moment Marcus thought they were too late. Then her chest rose and fell with the rhythm of natural sleep, and he realized she was unconscious but alive. "Your Highness," Lyra said softly, crossing the room with quick steps. The princess's eyes opened immediately, revealing intelligence that was sharp despite obvious exhaustion. When she saw Lyra, her face broke into a smile of relief and genuine affection. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd found a better job," she said, her voice hoarse but carrying unmistakable humor. "Never, Your Highness," Lyra replied, kneeling beside the princess to begin a medical assessment. "Are you injured?" "Nothing serious. A few bruises from the initial attack, and I think I may have a mild concussion." Princess Azara's gaze shifted to Marcus, studying him with curious intensity. "And you are?" "Marcus Chun, Your Highness," Marcus replied, not entirely sure of the proper protocol for addressing galactic royalty under these circumstances. "I repaired Guardian Lyra's damage systems." The princess's eyebrows rose. "You repaired Lyra? That must have been quite a technical challenge." "She made it easy," Marcus said, then felt foolish for the casual response. But Princess Azara laughed, a sound that was surprisingly warm and genuine. "I suspect that's not entirely accurate." "Lyra, how extensive was the damage?" "Significant, Your Highness. Multiple system failures that required several hours of careful repair work." Lyra's medical scanners were mapping the princess's injuries with methodical precision. Marcus demonstrated exceptional skill and generosity in providing assistance without any expectation of compensation. Indeed, the princess looked at Marcus with renewed interest. "That's unusual in my experience." "Basic human decency isn't that unusual," Marcus replied, then immediately worried that he'd been too forward. But again, the princess smiled. "Perhaps not among your people. I'm finding that humans continue to surprise me." Marcus was beginning to understand why Lyra was so devoted to her charge. Princess Azara carried herself with natural authority, but there was also genuine warmth and curiosity in her manner. She seemed like the kind of person who would insist on understanding the lives of those she governed, regardless of the personal risk involved. "Your Highness," Lyra said, completing her medical evaluation, "we need to evacuate this location immediately. Captain Vex is maintaining a perimeter, but our time is limited." Agreed, the princess said, accepting Lyra's assistance to stand. But first, there's something you both need to see. She led them to a collection of equipment that had been concealed behind observation deck furniture. Marcus recognized sophisticated recording and analysis gear, the kind of technology that intelligence agencies use for field operations. I've been documenting everything, Princess Azara explained, activating a portable data storage unit. The rebels aren't just planning assassination attempts. They've established a permanent intelligence network throughout the Outer Rim, funded and coordinated by someone with access to royal communication codes. Marcus felt the pieces clicking together. The surveillance equipment we saw in the maintenance levels. Exactly. But that's only one node in a much larger network. The princess's expression was grim. Someone within the royal court has been providing intelligence to rebel forces for at least 18 months. The assassination plot was just the most visible part of a comprehensive operation to destabilize royal authority in the frontier systems. Do you know who? Lyra asked. I have suspicions, but not enough evidence for accusations. However, the communication logs I've recovered from their equipment should provide the proof we need. Princess Azara sealed the data storage unit and handed it to Marcus. This information cannot fall into the wrong hands. Marcus accepted the device, understanding the weight of responsibility that came with it. If the princess was right, this data could expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of galactic government. Your Highness, Lyra said, her sensors detecting something that made her optical sensors flare brighter. We have incoming aircraft. Multiple contacts approaching from the northeast. Marcus moved to the observation windows and cursed under his breath. 3 aircraft were approaching the facility at high speed, their configurations suggesting military-grade equipment rather than Royal Guard shuttles. Those aren't ours, Princess Azara said, joining him at the window. The conspirators, Lyra concluded. They must have detected our presence. Marcus watched the approaching aircraft and felt his military training kicking into high gear. They were trapped 50 meters above ground level, with limited options for escape, and at least a dozen hostile forces converging on their position. Options, he asked. The tower's emergency evacuation system includes rappelling equipment for use during industrial accidents, the princess said, moving toward a maintenance cabinet. It's 50 years old, but it should still function. And if it doesn't, then we'll have a very short conversation with whoever's flying those aircraft, she replied with remarkable calm. Marcus looked at the approaching enemies, then at the princess and Lyra, both of whom seemed prepared to trust their lives to ancient safety equipment rather than surrender. Right, he said, checking his emergency beacon one final time. Let's see what these old cables are made of. The aircraft were less than 2 minutes away, and Marcus could already hear the sound of boots on the stairwell below them. Whatever happened next, it was going to happen fast. The emergency rappelling system was a marvel of industrial safety engineering, assuming you enjoyed trusting your life to equipment that predated most star charts. Marcus examined the cables and, anchoring points with a professional eye while the sound of approaching boots grew steadily louder from the stairwell. The good news is that they built things to last 50 years ago, he announced, testing the cable tension. The bad news is that these cables were designed for emergency evacuation, not tactical insertion under fire. Will they hold? Princess Azara asked, already strapping on the safety harness Lyra had retrieved from the emergency cabinet. They'll hold. The question is whether we can get down fast enough to avoid becoming target practice for our friends in those aircraft. The approaching aircraft had spread into an attack formation, their weapons systems clearly visible even from a distance. Marcus counted at least 2 heavy gunships and what looked like a troop transport, more than enough firepower to level the entire tower, if necessary. Lyra, he said, securing his own harness. Any chance you can provide covering fire during our descent? Affirmative. My combat systems are fully operational, and the tower structure should provide adequate protection from return fire. Lyra's optical sensors had taken on the distinctive targeting glow that Marcus was beginning to associate with her combat mode. However, I cannot guarantee suppression of all enemy positions simultaneously. Just give us enough distraction to reach the ground. Marcus replied, checking the princess's safety rigging with the thoroughness that 8 years of military engineering had drilled into him. Your Highness, have you ever done any tactical rappelling? Does escaping from my tutors by climbing out palace windows count? She asked with a grin that suggested the question wasn't entirely rhetorical. Close enough. The key is to maintain steady pressure on the brake line, and don't look down until you're on solid ground. The sound of boots had reached the landing just below them, accompanied by voices speaking in what Marcus recognized as Kytherian military cant. Professional soldiers, then not just local rebels with stolen equipment. Time to go, Marcus announced, activating his emergency beacon with a specific sequence that would alert Captain Vex to their exact position and situation. Lyra moved to the observation deck's main window, her combat systems selecting optimal firing positions. I'm ready to provide covering fire. On my mark, Marcus said, helping Princess Azara position herself at the rappelling anchor point. 3, 2, 1, mark. Lyra's plasma cannons opened fire through the observation deck windows, sending precisely aimed bolts toward the approaching aircraft. The gunships immediately broke formation, taking evasive action that bought Marcus and the princess precious seconds to begin their descent. Marcus went first, dropping through the shattered window in a controlled fall that had him covering 20 meters in the first few seconds. The old cables held perfectly, their industrial-grade construction more than adequate for human body weight even after decades of disuse. Princess Azara followed with surprising competence, her descent smooth and controlled despite her obvious exhaustion. Marcus could see that she'd understated her experience with improvised escapes. Above them, Lyra continued her covering fire while simultaneously tracking multiple target acquisitions. Her combat algorithms were working at maximum efficiency, placing suppressive fire exactly where it would do the most good while conserving ammunition for sustained engagement. The first of the hostile aircraft managed to get a firing solution on the tower, its heavy weapons systems charging for what would undoubtedly be a devastating barrage. Marcus watched the energy buildup with professional interest, calculating angles and timing with the kind of precision that came from years of working under pressure. Lyra, he called upward. Incoming fire, northeast quadrant. The Guardian's response was immediate and devastating. Instead of trying to suppress the gunship's weapons, she targeted its power distribution system with a series of precisely placed shots that overloaded the aircraft's main capacitors. The resulting explosion lit up the morning sky and sent debris raining down across the facility. Impressive, Princess Azara commented as they reached the 30-meter mark in their descent. I sometimes forget how lethal Lyra can be when properly motivated. Remind me never to get on her bad side, Marcus replied, checking their descent rate against the tactical situation developing around them. The remaining gunship had taken a more cautious approach, using the facility's structures for cover while trying to establish a firing position that wouldn't expose it to Lyra's accurate return fire. The troop transport had landed near the facility entrance, disgorging what looked like a full squad of heavily armed soldiers. We're going to have company when we reach the ground, Marcus observed. I was rather hoping we would, the princess replied with a smile that reminded Marcus that she was, after all, trained in combat tactics. I've been wanting to have a conversation with whoever's been trying to kill me. They reached ground level just as the first enemy soldiers rounded the corner of the processing building. Marcus immediately activated his personal defense systems, such as they were, while helping the princess out of her rappelling gear. Surrender the royal data, and you will be allowed to live, called a voice from behind cover. The accent was definitely Kytherian, confirming Marcus's suspicions about the sophistication of this operation. Counter offer, Princess Azara called back, her voice carrying the kind of absolute authority that made it clear she was accustomed to having her words carry weight. Surrender yourselves, and I'll consider recommending life imprisonment instead of execution for treason. The response was a burst of plasma fire that scorched the ground where they'd been standing moments earlier. Marcus grabbed the princess's arm and pulled her behind the shelter of a collapsed loading crane. "I don't think they're interested in negotiating," he said. "Pity. I was curious about their operational funding." The princess was checking her own weapon, an elegant but obviously functional sidearm that looked like it could put holes in power armor. "How long until the Royal Guard arrives?" Marcus checked his emergency beacon status. "Captain Vex should have received our position update by now. Probably another 10 minutes for tactical response." 10 minutes is a very long time under these circumstances. Above them, Lyra was still maintaining her covering fire, but the remaining gunship had found an angle that allowed it to target the tower's upper levels. Marcus could see weapons charging for another devastating barrage. "Lyra is in trouble," he said, watching the tactical situation develop. "She can handle herself," the princess replied, but Marcus could hear the concern in her voice. The problem was that while Lyra could probably survive a direct hit from the gunship's main weapons, the tower itself might not. If the structure collapsed, even a Guardian-class android might not be able to survive the fall. Marcus made a decision that probably qualified as either inspired or suicidal. "Your Highness, can you keep our friends down there busy for about 2 minutes?" "Certainly. What do you have in mind?" Marcus was already moving toward the facility's main power distribution center, an industrial complex that had provided electricity for the entire mining operation. If his memories of similar installations were accurate, there should be enough stored power in the emergency capacitors to create a very impressive distraction. "Emergency overload protocol," he called back. "If I can cascade the main power grid, it should disable most of their electronic systems long enough for the cavalry to arrive. And if the cascade is too powerful..." Marcus paused in his sprint toward the power center. "Then we'll all have a very brief but illuminating experience." The princess's laughter followed him as he reached the power distribution building. The main control systems were protected by industrial-grade security, but 40 years of fixing impossible problems had taught Marcus that every system had weaknesses if you knew where to look for them. The emergency access panel yielded to his universal repair tools, revealing a control matrix that was beautifully straightforward in its design. Fusion power systems were fundamentally simple, even when they were scaled up to industrial proportions. You just had to convince them to release their stored energy all at once instead of in carefully controlled amounts. Marcus began rerouting power from the emergency storage banks, building up charge levels that would have terrified any qualified engineer. Behind him, he could hear the distinctive whine of Princess Azara's weapon as she engaged the enemy soldiers with what sounded like considerable success. "Marcus!" Lyra's voice carried down from the tower. Enemy reinforcements approaching from multiple vectors. Marcus glanced up from his work long enough to see additional aircraft on the horizon. Either the rebels had committed everything they had to this operation, or they called for backup from off-world assets. Either way, the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Almost there," he called back, making the final connections that would turn the facility's power grid into the galaxy's most expensive firework display. The last connection sparked as he completed the circuit, and Marcus felt the hair on his arms stand up as massive electrical potential built up in the distribution system. Warning lights began flashing throughout the facility as safety systems tried desperately to prevent what they recognized as a catastrophic overload. Marcus stepped back from the control panel and activated the emergency discharge sequence. The explosion was magnificent. Every piece of electronic equipment within 2 kilometers suddenly found itself on the receiving end of an electromagnetic pulse that would have impressed a stellar physicist. The remaining gunship's engines died instantly, sending it into an uncontrolled crash landing that Marcus felt through the soles of his feet. The enemy soldiers' weapons and communication gear failed simultaneously, leaving them effectively blind and defenseless. Even the approaching reinforcements found their aircraft systems disrupted, forcing emergency landings throughout the surrounding area. In the sudden silence that followed the pulse, Marcus could hear the distinctive sound of Royal Guard shuttles approaching from the south. Captain Vex had apparently decided that discretion was the better part of valor and was arriving with what sounded like significant backup. That was either brilliant or completely insane, Princess Azara said, appearing at Marcus's side as the dust settled. I was going for brilliant, Marcus replied, watching Lyra rappel down from the tower with the fluid grace of someone who considered 50-meter drops routine exercise. The tactical situation is now under control, Lyra announced as she reached ground level. Enemy forces are neutralized, and the Royal Guard is establishing a security perimeter. Captain Vex's shuttle touched down nearby, disgorging a full squad of Royal Guard soldiers who immediately began securing the area with professional efficiency. The captain himself approached their position with what Marcus was beginning to recognize as his usual mixture of military bearing and barely controlled exasperation. "Your Highness," Vex said, his relief clearly audible even through his armor's external speakers. "Are you injured?" "Nothing that won't heal, Captain. Though I believe we've uncovered something that requires immediate investigation." Princess Azara held up the data storage device that contained the intelligence she'd gathered. This facility was the center of a sophisticated espionage network, and the evidence suggests the conspiracy reaches into the royal court itself. Captain Vex accepted the data device with appropriate solemnity. "We will begin analysis immediately." "There's something else," the princess continued, turning toward Marcus. "This human provided assistance far beyond what duty or law required. Without his help, both Guardian Lyra and I would likely have been killed or captured." Marcus felt distinctly uncomfortable with the attention. "I just did what needed to be done, Your Highness." "Precisely," she replied. "You saw a problem and solved it, without regard for personal risk or potential reward. That's exactly the kind of character that effective leadership requires." Captain Vex was studying Marcus with what felt like professional evaluation. The human demonstrated considerable resourcefulness under pressure. Indeed, he did. Princess Azara's smile was warm and genuine. "Marcus Chen, how would you feel about a change of career?" Marcus blinked, not entirely sure he'd heard correctly. "Your Highness, the Royal Engineering Corps is always looking for qualified personnel, and I suspect your talents are being somewhat underutilized in your current position." The princess glanced around at the smoldering remains of the rebel facility. "Besides, after today's demonstration, I think the galaxy could benefit from a few more humans in positions where they can apply that remarkable gift for improvisation." Marcus looked at Lyra, who was regarding him with what he was learning to recognize as android approval. Then he looked at Princess Azara, whose offer represented an opportunity he'd never dared imagine. "I'd be honored, Your Highness," he said finally, "though I should probably warn you that my approach to problem-solving isn't always entirely conventional." "Marcus," the princess replied with a laugh, "I think that's exactly what we need." As the Royal Guard shuttles prepared for departure, Marcus took one last look at his workshop in the distance. It had been a good life on rock bottom, fixing broken things and helping his neighbors. But perhaps it was time to see what other problems in the galaxy might benefit from a little human ingenuity. After all, there was a whole universe full of things that needed fixing. And humans, Marcus was beginning to realize, had a particular gift for finding solutions that no one else had considered. The galaxy was about to discover just how resourceful humanity could be when properly motivated. And Marcus Chun, former mechanic turned royal engineer, was going to be right at the center of that discovery. Some days, he reflected as Lyra helped him aboard the royal shuttle. The universe had a wonderful sense of timing, even if it took a broken droid and a missing princess to reveal it.